Have you ever heard the phrase, leave the past in the past? Now, I think it's a great phrase, right? I think keeping the past alive in the present is only going to jeopardize your present life and your future. So it makes total sense. The problem is that if you've undergone trauma and you have a traumatized nervous system, it's not that you don't want to leave it in the past, but until you know how to help your nervous system to do just that, trauma feels as if it's still happening day after day, even if the events or people in your life that caused it are gone. And that's really a hallmark of anyone that's working through complex PTSD, is that even if the events are over, they don't feel over in your body. So if this resonates, you're going to want to watch this video. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a survivor of emotional trauma myself. I'm a trauma-informed coach. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, and I'm also the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where we meet live on Zoom and we do the inner work together as a group, an international group, working through complex PTSD. So if you enjoy my videos and you want to dive deeper, make sure you check out my live meetings. The only thing is enrollment is only open the first 7 days of each month. So in this video, we're going to talk about how our brain files traumatic memories. It's really going to help us to understand why trauma feels like it's always happening in the present. We're also going to talk about the science behind emotional flashbacks, which is going to help us to understand what we call the inner child and how that is really a thing. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about how to be with the pieces of us that are still hurting from the past in a way that is helpful so that we're not re-traumatizing ourselves over and over or self-abandoning those pieces. Let's first understand how our brain stores our memories. Most of the time when we are remembering something that happened in the past, it's a form of explicit memory or autobiographical memory, where we're thinking of the memory and we know more or less when it happened. So for example, I was remarried 10 years ago. These 10 years have flown by, but I can feel the space between when I got married and where I am now. My son was born 18 years ago. And again, even though it feels like time flies, and for any parent out there, it really, really does. Even though that's the case, I can still feel the distance, right? I still know that I didn't have him yesterday. It's very clear that he's not an infant, that he's a young man. And so the brain is able to know this memory happened that long ago. There's a timestamp on it. The problem is that when we have trauma, when we're going through trauma, the hippocampus gets affected due to chronic stress. Being stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn all the time affects the ability of our hippocampus to work properly, which means memories come in and they don't get that timestamp. So imagining our hippocampus like a librarian. Imagine people coming in and they're bringing their books, right? The librarian puts the stamp on and then files them where the book is supposed to go. But let's say somebody comes in and just dumps a ton of books all at once, and there's so many that the librarian is overloaded, puts those aside and just deals with the day-to-day, one book at a time person that comes in, right? And that pile just stays there. Something similar happens to us with traumatic memories. When something happens that is too much, too fast, too soon, and with no support for our nervous system to work through it, it's like an overload happens, an overload of information that affects our hippocampus's ability to put that timestamp. And so those memories are sitting there, like those books that were like piled on in a corner. And they're sitting there in our implicit memory. Now, unlike explicit memories that have that timestamp that you know that, yes, this happened this long ago, everything that's stored in our implicit memory is stored in the present tense. So if I had a lot of trauma in a relationship, let's say a parent relationship where I was shamed for being my authentic self, like just breathing would cause suffering for me. Instead of feeling like when I was a child, I was shamed every time I did this, that, or the other thing. When it's in our implicit memory, it's almost like to our nervous system, I am being shamed every day for this, that, and the other thing. So without that timestamp, that's why we feel like the past, we can't seem to leave it in the past, not because we're not strong enough, not because we're not trying to heal, not because we don't want to let go, but because our brain, the way our brain works with trauma memories, is not allowing us to do so. So I say that so that you can take some of the shame off of yourself, because I know when I was not understanding this, I thought that only further made me feel like there was something severely wrong with me, which only fed the shame. And I just want to talk a little bit about implicit memory a little bit more. It's not just learning with words. What gets stored in our implicit memory is emotional learning. They're the emotional truths that we learned through experience. And that's why it's a struggle to work through past trauma as well, because maybe in the past I was shamed for being my authentic self, right? But maybe logically, I know that it's normal. Like everyone's allowed to be themselves. It's a normal thing. I logically know that. It makes complete sense. But that logical learning is stored in the cortical regions of our brain, whereas our emotional learning, the things we learn through experience, the things that are stored where our implicit memory is stored, that's subcortical. So it's in two different areas of the brain that it's almost like they speak two different languages, right? One is through words, maybe through learning, through thinking, and the other is through experiencing and feeling and sensing. One common example people use to explain implicit memory is riding a bike. Well, why is that such a great example of implicit memory? Well, there's so much you can learn by a book, right? How, okay, you put your foot here, you do this, and you get that cognitive learning. But it's nothing like when you actually get on the bike and you can feel the lack of balance and you learn how to sense into how to stay balanced and riding that bike without falling. Two separate things from book learning or cognitive learning and actually experiencing. So, what is in our implicit memory are things that we learned through experience. And as adults, they can defy normal logic, right? For example, some things that we learn in childhood that we learn and are stuck in our implicit memory are the beliefs there's something wrong with me. Maybe there's absolutely nothing wrong with that child. There never was anything wrong with that child, but the parent maybe had a personality disorder. Maybe they had NPD, BPD, or maybe they struggled with addictions, or they had their own trauma, unhealed trauma. And they felt like there was something wrong with them. They never got healed and they projected that onto the child, right? When that child grows up, all the logic in the world of saying there's nothing wrong with you, it's going to be head knowledge for a long time until they can learn how to help their body to feel the truth of those words. And so it's because of the way that the brain stores traumatic memories that kind of shifts me into the next topic of discussion that I wanted to have with you. And that's the fact that we can suffer with emotional flashbacks. So for anyone out there that thinks, I don't have an inner child, or inner child work is woo woo, it's really weird, it doesn't make sense, I'm an adult, I shouldn't have to deal with that from the past. Hopefully, the science behind emotional flashbacks is going to help you to understand why you may want to reconsider inner child work. Emotional flashbacks are one of the 5 main symptoms of cptsd, and they take place when a memory that's stored in our implicit memory is triggered by something happening in the present. And it can be anything. So, for example, let's say every time when I was a child, I was hit and punished severely right after I received like this look of daggers from my parent. As an adult, anytime somebody gives me like a really intense, serious look, my body might go into a state of fear and panic. And again, logically, it may not make sense, but emotionally, the emotional learning that I have in my implicit memory is that that look is accompanied by something really bad happening to me. And so my body starts waking up and trying to do something to keep me safe. What it does to try to keep me safe is it usually goes into a trauma response of either fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So we might get really angry and snap at the person. We might flee and just completely cut off contact and never want to be around that person again. We might fawn and stifle our true perspectives and how we're really feeling to try to make them happy. Or we might just freeze and just feel dissociated and disconnected from our body, right? This is an emotional flashback. And the reason it's taking place is because the memory from the past is getting touched on. And again, remember, there's no timestamp. So being shamed and or hit anytime somebody gave me that look, it's suddenly as if my body is reliving it at that moment. That memory was never filed away. What they were doing in the present woke it up. Now, it's a little challenging to understand this with cptsd, but with ptsd, it's so crystal clear. So for example, let's say somebody was in war and they flew helicopters, right? And they had really bad experiences when they were in the helicopter. They might be out with some friends having a wonderful time, be completely safe, and the sound of a helicopter might cause them to drop to the floor and almost relive whatever they went through traumatically in the past, right? And it's clear what's happening. It's like the past is waking up and it's as if that person is reliving it in the moment. It's a little bit more understandable to see how that happens with PTSD because there's usually a clear memory as to why that person is dropping to the ground. It's like, oh, there's the helicopter. It reminded me of that. The problem with CPTSD is they are emotional flashbacks. So rather than experiencing a reaction from a specific moment, the emotion from the past is what's triggered. If there's no timestamp on it, when that emotion comes up, you're not experiencing it from the adult you are, but rather from the time that it happened. And so, because there's no clear memory as to why you're feeling this way, it's really easy to think that it's what's happening in the present. No, it's because they act like this. It's because they say this. It's because this happened. Now, I'm not minimizing that whatever's happening in your present, it's going to affect you. It's going to cause you to feel pain. If somebody's unkind, you're going to feel the pain of that. But when it's to a degree that isn't in harmony with the circumstances that's going on, that's when it's a good indication that what you're experiencing isn't just a normal emotion from what's happening, but possibly an emotional flashback. And when we're experiencing an emotional flashback to our body, whatever trauma was in the past, our nervous system thinks it's happening right now. And for those that have ever read Pete Walker's book, CPTSD From Surviving to Thriving, if you haven't, it's a great publication. I encourage you to read it. But he has 13 steps of working through emotional flashbacks. And step one is just to say, I'm having an emotional flashback. And the reason that's the first step is because of what I just mentioned. Without that timestamp to the brain, it's happening now. And so when we say, oh, I think I'm having an emotional flashback, we're actually helping our brain to have that one foot in the past, but keep one foot in the present as well. Now, how emotional flashbacks tie in with inner child work. The memories that are stored in our implicit memory, right, that are always in the present. Imagine they're like a file in a computer. For example, if I go into my files right now, in my documents files, I have a bunch of files that I'm currently working on. But I also have saved files, closed files, zipped files that I'm not working on, but that are stored for several different reasons. I also have files that I have selected to not be able to edit them further, right? Well, the memories that are stored in our implicit memory are often like a zipped file, a closed file, and they run the neural net of what happened and everything that is associated with what happened at that traumatic event. And when I mean everything, it literally can take in the colors that are around you, the people that are around you, the time of day. It just all bakes it together. Once things are in our implicit memory, they're kind of like a zipped file in the sense that they don't continue to gather more information. So we're living our life, we're growing up, right? We're leaving our home. If we had childhood trauma, we're now becoming adults and creating a new life. The files that are there in our implicit memory They're like those zipped files. No new information is added to them. And so certain events, it's as if they're still happening at the age when they occurred. And what is also kicked on is what our survival brain did to protect us at that time, right? So whatever coping skills, whatever adaptations that we had to work through to deal with that traumatic event, that's also part of that neural net. And so when an emotional flashback takes place, basically what's happening is that zipped file is opening up and we're experiencing that memory as if it was happening now. So if it happened at 5 years old, 7 years old, it's almost like a piece of us from that time is online. And so that's where we want to step in and help these pieces of us that have been stuck in a closed file when we are refeeling it from that age, when we're experiencing the trauma in our body at that moment, it feels re-traumatizing. We can't help ourselves from that place because we're overwhelmed. When we're in our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the coping skills that we're getting flung into normally are coping skills that no longer serve us. Now, I'll leave that one for a whole nother video. Okay, but that's where the inner child work comes in, where we want to start helping these pieces of us that have been fragmented and stored in our implicit memory to realize, we want to help them to realize that there is a loving, compassionate adult present now. Now, the challenge with that is that when our emotions come online, they can be extremely overwhelming. So we can wind up getting flooded by an emotion from the past that is unresolved and it feels too much. We can be afraid to feel. So it's like the fear of the feeling itself because the body remembers how big it was when we were so small. And also, our protective pieces, the coping skills that are trying to keep us from feeling these intense emotions, can almost act like a wall or a barrier between our adult self and these hurt pieces that are inside. So we have to learn how to be with them. Now, in the School of Transformation, one of the things we talked about was the importance of being and spending time with our protective parts. The parts that don't want us to go near the shame, that don't want us to really be with anything painful, that they're trying to help us to not feel them, but they're doing so in ways that aren't helpful anymore. For example, making us shut down, making us people please, a harsh inner critic, all of these things that our nervous system developed to keep us safe, right? So they're still doing them. And so I'll do another video on how to be with your protective pieces. But in this video, I want to move into an exercise that you can do that can help you to spend time with a hurt piece from the past. Now, I'm going to be honest. When I was first on my recovery journey, I didn't want to spend time with these hurt pieces. I wanted to just move forward. I wanted to be like, well, that's in the past. Why do I have to go there? For example, shame. When I was first told, Michele, you have to learn to love your shame and have compassion for it. I was like, are you kidding me? Like that shame is ruining my life. Like it felt like it was ruining my life. And so if you have resistance to wanting to be with hurt pieces that are keeping you from living as how you truly are, just know that it's understandable. And what you'll learn as you're learning about working through trauma and getting yourself back after trauma is that the more you can accept, love, forgive, be patient with these hurt pieces from the past, the more together you're going to feel, right? Because the pieces that we don't like, we tend to like exile and divorce ourselves from them. And so we don't feel whole inside. And as we start learning how to be with these pieces, we start healing them and feeling more whole and more empowered. That being said, I have a small exercise that I want to share with you guys so that if you want to spend time with a piece from the past that you feel is needing attention, that is still hurting, that is feeling a vulnerable emotion, and rather than ignoring it, which is really self-abandonment, you want to spend time with it, then this exercise is for you. So get comfortable.